Good evening, everyone. We are getting ready to start our webinar this evening. We're going to give it just a couple more seconds to let folks join. But thank you, everyone, for joining us. Yeah, we're definitely getting folks joining. So.
Oh, I see people I know.
Great. All right. Well, good evening. Welcome to tonight's HLAA Task Force for Accessible Inclusive Employment webinar. It's entitled Improving Your Workplace Performance. And thank you for joining us. My name is Melissa Cruz, and I'll be your host this evening. I'm going to start off by giving you some basic tech tips. First of all, to see the captions on this webinar, you're going to need to click on the CC icon and click on Show Subtitles. To change the font size, you're going to do that in the subtitle setting. And we're not doing a full transcript this evening. For questions, we're going to use the Q&A button, and the chat feature will be available for technical issues and the panelists today. Like I said, if you want to ask a question of our presenters, just use the Q&A icon to type in your question, and we'll be using that to facilitate the Q&A after the presentation. If you've joined by computer, the presentation should be in side-by-side mode. Slides are on the left, and the panelists should be on the right in gallery view. You can change the size of your side-by-side view by hovering between the screens and moving the gray bar to adjust to your desired size. If you've joined by your phone, mobile device, iPad, your view may be slightly different, and you may have to scroll between views to get to the desired one. Just a disclaimer that HLAA does not endorse any products that might be featured in this webinar. This is an educational opportunity put on by our task force to introduce different opportunities and how they could benefit folks with hearing loss. I would also like to mention that if you're interested in employment and workplace issues, Dr. Ruffin, Dr. Baldridge, Jill Herbold, and several other members of both the task force and HLAA will be presenting at the HLAA convention in New Orleans this summer. They'll be presenting on workplace accommodations for accessible, inclusive employment. And registration for the convention is now open and can be found on our website. And if you check the chat, you should find a link to our website and the convention. And I'm now going to turn the presentation over to one of our task force members, Cleese Riahan.
Thank you, Melissa. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Cleese Riahan. I'm a member of HLAA's Task Force for Accessible Inclusive Employment, which is hosting today's webinar. Our goal as a task force is to help people with hearing loss thrive in the workplace and to help employers create workplaces that are more accessible and inclusive of people with hearing loss. This slide here shows members of our task force. If you'd like to learn more about the task force, you can contact the chair, Dr. David Baldridge, for more information. His email is on the bottom of the screen, and I believe later in the program we'll also be reposting that email. I have the honor of introducing tonight's speaker, Dr. Chad Ruffin. Dr. Ruffin currently practices in Seattle, Washington, and focuses on medical and surgical treatment of hearing loss, primarily for adults. He is the first person born deaf to become a surgeon with cochlear implants and is one of 5 ENT surgeons worldwide with cochlear implants. Born with severe hearing loss, he is uniquely equipped with the skills and experience necessary to improve the lives of hard of hearing patients. Dr. Ruffin completed surgical training at Indiana University, one of the most rigorous otolaryngology residency programs. He also completed advanced training in ear surgery and cochlear implant research as a faculty physician at Indiana University. He is passionate about using his journey as a deaf patient, a surgeon, auditory neuroscientist, and hearing technology innovator to help others succeed with hearing loss. In addition to working one-on-one with patients at his clinic in Seattle, Dr. Ruffin and his team perform innovative research and advocacy for the hard of hearing community. He is research trained in both bottom-up, how the ear encodes speech and music, and top-down effects, cognitive changes of hearing loss on people. I'd like to now welcome Dr. Ruffin.
Hi, Dr. Cleese. Thank you for that warm introduction. I'm very happy to be here. There's a lot of work that goes into bringing these talks. And I'd like to thank the co-host, HLAA, Dr. Baldridge, and everyone for helping out to put this on. I personally understand how difficult it is to change attitudes and to succeed in the workplace. I think that ENT is one of the hardest professions, subspecialties of medicine to get into. So a lot of these things that you hear along the way, while they're science-based, they're based on things that I learned and looked into the literature to try to hack my way into being able to achieve what I wanted to achieve. Let me get my screen shared. So today we're going to talk about how to succeed in the workplace. And I'm going to try to keep this down to 30 minutes so we have plenty of time to ask questions. So most people think that improving workplace performance means improving your access to spoken language, like making it easier to hear. And some examples for this is like making sure you have enough light to lip read, making sure you're in a quiet room, making sure there's no light behind the speaker so that you can lip read. Use live or auto captions if they're available. The problem with these things is each of them focuses only on the receptive speech and ignores how hearing loss affects how we process things, how we express ourselves, and how this is affected by our other medical and mental health issues. So the one key takeaway from this entire talk is that working to hear is not the same thing as working to communicate and to connect with each other. And that is a key thing that anyone has to be successful, a skill that anyone needs to be able to be successful at work. It's not hearing, it's about connecting with others. And I have a fun little poll I'd like to share with you. I'm going to let Melissa, I launched the poll, but I'm not quite sure if people can see it. But you have two people. Andy and Deshaun can both hear about 20% of their sentences with hearing aids. Each of them they're otherwise pretty similar. And I'm curious who you think will be happier after a cochlear implant. Either Deshaun gets the best performance and he gets 80% of sentences correct after his implant, or Andy, who gets about 40%, about half as much as Deshaun, or both will have a pretty similar quality of life. Get 132 people and we've got 76 answered so far. Give a 30 more seconds. Okay, so half people think that Deshaun is going to be happier, and then half of people think that both will have a pretty similar quality of life. And the answer is actually C. we robustly know that people, after they get either a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, both of them will have similar qualities of life, no matter how well you hear. So that speaks to something going on deeper than just hearing. And I think it's about connecting, and we're going to talk more about that. Going to share the results. Maybe I didn't do that right. So these are some examples of feedback that I've gotten at work. You need to be nicer. You don't talk much and staff think you are cold. You seem angry. You don't seem very engaged. You seem arrogant. Our first thought is to take this as discrimination or as a microaggression because we're not being understood. But really what's likely happening is that neither party, either your employer, or supervisor, or you understand what's going on. So hearing people are clumsily describing communication breakdowns that have less to do with how well you hear the words and how well you can, and more about how well you communicate. And people want to help, but they don't know how to describe what's going on. And they're also lazy. They're not going to think deeply about what you need. So the better you understand the issues, the better you'll be able to clearly articulate your needs. So just to reemphasize again, quality of life is not correlated with how well you hear speech with hearing aids or cochlear implants. It has much more to do with other factors that we really don't understand just yet. And I think that a lot of people think the approach life, if I could just hear better, had a better hearing aid, had better programming for my cochlear implant, I would have less of a problem. But we know that hearing loss is more than just hearing words. It affects how we hear and identify other auditory and nonverbal cues, how we process information, and how we express ourselves. And this leads again to a point I'm going to make over and over again. Hearing isn't communication. The last 40 years, let me back up, sorry. If we increase hearing ability, getting better hearing directly improves our quality of life, we should have seen this sometime in the last 40 years, because during this time, we've had better hearing aids and cochlear implants, awareness of sign languages, we had better legal protections. But in this entire 40 years, the socioeconomic status of people with hearing loss has not changed. So we need a better approach than focus on these traditional items. And I will say this as more as like a position statement. Neither cochlear implants nor sign languages solve all the issues with hearing loss. The issues are different for each communication mode, but in many ways they're similar. And we're going to discuss some of the hidden effects of hearing loss. And again, the vague feedback that you receive from people may feel discriminatory, but it's really because people don't understand the hidden effects of hearing loss, and often neither do you. So the underlying goal is to help make an invisible diagnosis visible so you can clearly introduce people as hearing loss as the backseat passenger that's always with you, because that's exactly what I do every day. And hopefully this gives you a better understanding of your hearing journey. And everyone has different ears, different brains, different communication methods. We bring prior trauma to the table, and we also have sources of pride. So this presentation is divided up into key features of sound, how the brain processes and does all this stuff that it does, the structure of communication, and key domains that are affected by hearing loss, and then ideas for communications and advocacy and accommodations. So, how hearing works. There are several attributes to sound: rhythm, loudness, location, and pitch. And they're both differentially affected by severe hearing loss. Rhythm is very much preserved in severe hearing loss, and is preserved if you have a cochlear implant. Loudness doesn't mean just volume. It also means being able to detect tiny changes in volume. Location. Typical hearing people don't hear just a direction. A sound is an object that is off in space and it is real. It is an object and you can hear it moving in different places. And it is an object just as much as an animal, a moving animal is an object, or a brick building. And location is very much affected by severe hearing loss. Sorry. Pitch is the final one and probably the most important one that is affected by severe hearing loss. Pitch is frequency, or the differences between the piano keys on a keyboard. And typical hearing people have a great sense of pitch. And we're going to talk about why this is so important. So I'm going to play two different melodies that differ only in their pitch contour. You cannot use rhythm to tell which is which. And just listen to them right now. And then the second one. So the first one was Mary Had a Little Lamb, and the second one was Happy Birthday. People with cochlear implants uniformly really can't tell which of these are which among common nursery rhymes. Typical hearing people can do this in a few seconds. So that's one example why pitch is really important for music. But pitch also tells us a ton about people. When we talk about words, speech, we can talk about lexical cues, the actual words of speech, but there's also what we call indexical cues, which are other speech cues that are unique to a person. They're cues such as rate, emotion, tone, energy level, sexual state. Is someone romantically interested in you? How interested are they? If someone is healthy or if they're fit, people can tell if someone is super physically fit or if they have a little bit too much padding on them. Then there are things that kind of stay the same per person, and like, are they male or female? Who they are. Typical hearing people can identify a speaker immediately based on just a few seconds of listening to the voice. You can tell how much money a person makes and where they spent most of their life. The key thing about these is that they are instantaneously available.
He was her favorite visit.
They're instantaneously available to typical hearing people. It's like a vibe, like smell sometimes, like when it comes to emotion and these different things. And they form a significant part of making a first impression on people. And deaf and hard of hearing people can identify these cues at about half the rate of typically hearing people.
He was her favorite visitor so far.
He was her favorite visitor so far.
He used the leftovers for lunch the next day.
He used the leftovers for lunch the next day.
You're hearing a couple of sentences, one where it's said neutrally and then one where it's said with emotion. And these are just some examples of sentences that we use to test hearing in research settings. So a lot of people make the mistake that you can replace what you don't hear with vision, and that's really not the case. Not everyone can identify the cues to begin with visually, and then being able to do this in the heat of the moment, in like stressful conversations, you may not be able to process these cues. And age also plays a role in here. If you're really young or much older, you rely more on vision and auditory cues. And this gets to the point where one of the few things that actually matters in terms of hearing and quality of life is your ability to hear emotion. And that suggests that it's more about connecting to someone, not just getting the information. So in the clinic, this is important because now we do hearing preservation cochlear implants. And this is just showing a patient with a ski slope hearing loss who has very good low frequency information, and then bad hearing in the high frequencies. And what we traditionally done is lost residual hearing. But now what we like to do, if possible, is to preserve the residual hearing and use a hearing aid and a cochlear implant in the same ear. And these patients typically do much better on pitch-oriented tasks like hearing and background noise, being able to hear indexical cues, for example, and likely indexical cues. We don't have data for that, but they definitely do hear better in speech and music speech and background noise and on music. So it stands to reason that they're going to be able to hear these indexical cues better. And this is no longer a myth. In my practice, this is a pretty common outcome, being able to preserve hearing. So we can use pitch cues across 2 ears to hear speech and background noise better than any computer on earth. And localization is more than telling just where sound is coming from. For typically hearing people, sounds are auditory objects moving in space. They're objects that are real, and they're real as anything visual that you see. And because of this fine hearing across 2 ears, typically hearing people can segregate audio into various streams. They can hone in onto one object and completely ignore the others. On the graph, you can see a visual representation of what we call auditory scene analysis. This is a hammer and a flute. The flute is, whoops. Hold on a second. How do you do this? Trying to find a pointer or something. Oh, well. The flute is the standing waves on the screen, the wavy things across the entire graph by the gold arrows. The hammer are the sounds from they're punctuated and they're going with the green arrows. So typically hearing people, they can listen to the flute and mostly tune out the hammer and vice versa, because they do auditory scene analysis. And it's very difficult for people with any amount of hearing loss to do this. So that is the fundamentals of hearing. The brain is where hearing occurs, and you hear in the auditory cortex. The only thing I want you to take away from this this simple graph, is that the auditory cortex has lots of connections to various areas. It's connected to other senses like vision, as well as to the frontal lobe where processing occurs, and to the motor areas for producing speech. One of the reasons why we're much more aggressive in treating hearing loss these days is because changing in hearing can lead to significant impacts on multiple areas of the brain. And the brain, there are many things that can affect how you hear, how you process and express yourself. One is the age at which you lose your hearing. The earlier you lose your hearing, the longer of an effect it has across your lifespan. The auditory brain starts developing in response to sound in the womb. The fetus prefers its mother's voice. The developed trajectory for speech and language development is rapid, and it's compressed into the first few years of life. The earlier you lose your hearing, the more it's going to affect how you process information and also how you express yourselves. There's a whole long story for that. But I frequently see, bullet point number 2, I frequently see so I am pausing because I think someone raised their hand, and my view in the presenter mode is really, really limited. So if anyone needs to chat or something, please put it in the webinar chat. So the second bullet point is untreated adult onset hearing loss. Frequently people come to me and they've been without hearing for a long time, and they lose the ability to process abstract language and thoughts. People vary in their brain's ability to use working memory and signal reconstruction techniques to be able to hear in noise. It's one of the primary limiters for cochlear implants. And there are cognitive changes that are associated with hearing loss, where the visual part of the brain can start to take over the auditory parts of the brain that are not being used because they're not being used for hearing in hearing loss. And this can help or harm people's hearing. One of the key things is cognitive load. And cognitive load is how hard we work to hear. how hard you work to hear isn't related to how bad your hearing is. This is why doctors see patients with mild hearing losses who complain bitterly about how hard it is for them to hear. And cognitive load is a super important concept. Generally speaking, a person with a cochlear implant hearing in quiet is going to be working as hard to hear as a typically hearing person is in a loud bar. Other illnesses like autoimmune disease, dizziness, and cancer treatments can cause fatigue and brain fog that compounds the cognitive load of hearing loss. So a lot of people don't know about this. There are many mental health issues or subdivisions of mental health. We know that PTSD and anxiety and depression and loneliness can change the brain circuitry for the worse. I wouldn't be surprised if similar findings could be found for trauma from ableism and discrimination. So we bring a lot to the table. Now, tying this all together, the goal of communication is to connect with others, and to connect is to create a mental representation of the other person that you're exchanging information with so that you can together accomplish goals. So what you're really trying to figure out is what people mean beyond what they actually say. And this goes back to the quality of life. The only thing that makes a difference that we know of is small, is the ability to perceive emotion and voice, because we're trying to make a connection with people, not just to hear what they're saying. We're trying to figure out what they mean beyond what they say. So what do we do when we talk to people? We have speech. We're hearing the actual words of speech. If we're having hearing loss, we're trying to pick up phonemes, individual syllables to make up the words. We go to sentences. And then we talked about the indexical cues earlier. We are listening to these as well. And then there's non-lexical speech, like the ums and the ahs about speech. And we have nonverbal cues, such as sex and gender, their facial shape and features, facial expressions, body position, how your people are moving their bodies, all personal space, their gestures, their eye gaze. All of this provides some insight into what people mean beyond what they say. And then we have context, like where are you talking? Have you talked to this person before? What's their socio-cultural background? Where do they come from? All of this fits under the umbrella of pragmatics, which is things that play a difference in the unsaid meaning of things. So we use these cues to create a mental model of the other person, which is the theory of mind. And we put this together for discourse and for language. So we take information in and we express it. And we're using all of these different cues to do this. Oops. So you can imagine with all of these varying cues that where you could have miscommunication, ambiguity. There's a ton of opportunities for mismatch between people here. And that's what small talk is for. Small talk is to try to get to know other people and kind of figure out what some of these cues mean when they're ambiguous. And I know that deaf and hard of hearing people don't like small talk, but that's what it's for, is to reduce ambiguity. So then you're doing this one-on-one. Man, animations, sorry. You're doing this one-on-one for people, but when you are in a room and you are at a conference, you have to do this with every person. And this is what's called reading the room. And that's why I have this repeated each time. So people with hearing loss, the key point are in the weeds, reconstructing a poor signal. So you can miss out into these other cues that provide insight into what's really being said. Not only that, the longer your hearing loss has been going on, especially the younger you are, you have less of an ability to hear, overhear conversations and learn from incidental conversation. And that gives you less political, if you want to call it, less political experience, or soft skills. Okay. So now we're going to talk about how I put all of this together in trying to succeed at work. One, you got to manage your medical conditions. If you have depression, anxiety, other mental health issues, other medical illnesses, you have to work to fix those or make them improve your quality of life. People with hearing loss bring anxiety, depression, loneliness, and trauma from prior ableism, discrimination to the table. You got to keep the emotion out of it when you're advocating for yourself. This is a really important slide because a lot of people want better technology, but, and here's the most important concepts. One, 2 ears are better than one. If you have one hearing aid, only one cochlear implant, get 2 if you can. Make sure your hearing aids are fit with real ear measures, and you can Google this. Only about 2 in 10 audiologists will do this. I frequently have people coming to me and they have underfit hearing aids. You don't have to spend a lot on hearing aids to get good, you don't have to spend the top dollar on hearing aids to get good hearing aids. You need to also understand how they work in noise. They work with the noise setting set behind you. They're very good at taking out background noise when it's behind you and when it's babble noise and not reverberation. Sometimes hearing aids, they have an automatic sound processing feature that can be distracting. So sometimes it can be helpful to turn that off. You can use hearing assistive technology like remote microphones. I use these all the time, especially in the operating room. And you can use telecoils, Bluetooth stuff. Now, advocacy. So women with hearing loss actually out-earn men with hearing loss. And that's because women with hearing loss will say, I have hearing loss. Can you do X for me? Where men with hearing loss will say, I have hearing loss. And they don't really follow up. And when you advocate for yourself, people react the way they should. So what I mean by that is if you are not confident about it, then people aren't going to be confident about with you. They're going to be more apt to walk over you and not do what you need. So be upfront, clearly ask for what you need, and treat your hearing loss as a backseat passenger. Be sure to smile, say thank you, and make people feel included. Don't assume that the way you communicate in quiet with familiar people are going to be the same as in noise or stressful situations. People tend to tamp down their voice and their body language in stressful situations, and you have fewer cues to read people with. And you may also be like, giving the death stare and doing this ramrod stare at people, trying to listen to every word. So try to be more relaxed, smile more, and just be aware about this. So personally, what does this mean for me? You need to be nicer. You don't talk much and staff think you're a cold. Well, in certain environments, there's a lot of noise going on, and I'm taking care of patients. So my mental processing is going on and on and on. So what I do is I tell people that what's going on. I am not being unfriendly. I am just processing what's going on and doing my thing. So, and I explicitly tell people this. And you seem angry. So to be able to hear, to be able to express yourself, part of expression verbally is hearing. And if you can't hear vocal tone well, you may not be able to produce it. So for me, what that means is when I am upset, it's very, very easy if I'm not super careful to let that anger slip out in my voice. And it's, when it happens, like it's really off-putting for people, even though I try very hard. So keeping a calm, even tone, because remember, It's about connecting, and part of connecting is monitoring your speech and making sure that you're making up for your inability to hear tone. Example number 3 kind of goes along with number 1. You don't seem very engaged. And that's because I'm not talking as much. I'm not interacting in stressful situations. So I tell people this. And then I think example 4 is you seem arrogant, has to do with probably not making as much small talk and being direct about my needs. And I try to off balance that by making sure that I engage in small talk and make other people feel included and ask them what they think. So here are some other examples of advocacy. So you are working really hard to hear. And so standing has a cognitive load. You have to think about standing. So sit down when you receive complex information. When you are talking to someone and you're not quite sure what they mean, you can ask them. You can say, I don't hear tone well. I feel like you're upset. Am I hearing you accurately? And that gives them a chance to explain where they're coming from. I have a lot of students coming to me asking like for advice, and a lot of times we tell them to interview better. And one of the things is to practice your interviews down like all the time until it's second nature. And these students often come back and say that they don't want to do that. They don't want to seem contrived. And I tell them a story about Lyndon Johnson, former president, who, when he was a senator and he was being chauffeured around Washington by himself, he would practice entire conversations with other people, like what he would do if X happened, if Y happened, if Z happened. And so that when the person that he was talking to, they would never know that they were being handled. So you may have to do that. And that what that effectively does is lower your cognitive load. So you have several tools for the conversation, so to speak, that you can just pull out of your backpack easily and deploy them in the conversation. You don't have to think about it. And while you're doing this, you can watch the other person, see how they're taking this information in, and then tailor that as needed. Another thing I tell people to do is smile. Tell people what you're feeling to sidestep any expressive speech disfluencies. So I tell people often that, I can't hear you very well. So if I sound upset or something, it's not at you. It's just I may be stressed about something. Cognitive advocacy. So when I'm at dinner sometimes, I'll take my ears off, but I'll tell my guests that I don't think you're boring. Listening for me is like translating a foreign language. And that makes, they understand exactly when I say that. I made it very visible that that is my issue and that's the accommodation I'm requesting. And people are totally fine. But if I don't tell them that I don't think you're boring, they will think that you think that they're boring, and they'll feel offended by that or lesser. Don't worry about trying to hear everything. This is not something I can really explain all that well, but like when I'm in the operating room, medicine is very visual, and I can tell you what's going on without ever hearing a thing. So I don't really stress about overhearing side conversations and stuff like that. But I do pay a heck of a lot of attention to monitoring things visually, like looking at the noise. Even though looking at people moving around, if there's some movement that keys me into, I should ask what's going on. Something else I do is, even though I'm not listening specifically, but if the tenor of the room changes, I do ask for what's going on. The other thing I do is make life easier. So I spend a lot of time making my life easier because I'm working harder to hear. I don't want to work harder on other things. Maintaining professional relationships. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was about how do you form bonds with people at work when they may discriminate against you. And someone described it, think of it as your work family. And that's exactly how I've treated it since. You have loose connections at work, but it stays at work. I also look for mentors who are excellent communicators. And I also do this because I think excellent communicators have a good idea of what's going on in the background, basically. And I think they are apt to invest in you more. I think that mentors who are also female or underrepresented are great to get a hold of. How to get people to wear hearing tech. So I always struggled with this in school and in training, and I didn't know how to deal with it. You know, I wanted people to wear my remote microphone. And I had a medical student come up to me one time and say, ask me for advice. And I knew immediately what to say, even though I had no idea in the heat of the moment what to do. And I told this student wanted help with their professor to wear a microphone during surgery. And the professor said what people often say, which is, oh, don't worry about it, I'll talk louder. Well, I told the students say this, sir, you are a great surgeon, and I want to be a great surgeon like you, and I want to learn as much as I can from you. But if I am working hard to hear, I am not working to learn, and I won't be as good of a surgeon as you. And right away, that flatters a person. It tells them exactly what you need in a way that generates empathy. And if you look to the side of this, it's being asked in a manner such that the person can't say no. And when you do it this way, you have to plan for, you know, what are you going to say when they say no? So frame your request for accommodations that way. So the top bullet, prior trauma versus empathy. So you got to leave your prior discrimination at home. That's really, really, really tough to do sometimes. And you're going to have to put yourself out there. We have like all of these legal frameworks for requesting accommodation, but really what it comes down to is one person is making themselves vulnerable and they're asking another person for help. And you can't get away from that. Not all the laws in the country will change that. But that's what's going on. And it's hard to put aside that prior trauma, but you got to do it. And final thing, I think this is the final thing. It is, don't assume things are going well. Take time with your coworkers, your direct reports, the people, your supervisors. Ask them for feedback. Ask them if they have any suggestions to make communication easier for you and make it more efficient at work. That's really, really important. Okay, I tried to make this as short, but I think we're down at the end of the hour. If you want to contact me, this chadruffinmd.com contact form ends up in my inbox. If you'd like to come and chat with me more about things, if we don't have time today, you can go to the second QR code and use that QR code to sign up for a Zoom. And I do these Zooms about roughly every couple of weeks where you can just sign up and like talk to me about whatever. I think the calendar is only out to February, but they will start showing up as I put more dates on the calendar. The other thing is, I would appreciate it if you could leave a review on Google for me. Google means nothing for patient care. It has nothing to do with outcomes. But what it does is help me show up higher in the search rankings so that I can help other patients. So if you can leave a review, say, I attended Dr. Ruffin's talk, I learned X, Y, and Z, go to that link. It would be very much appreciated. Especially because we're doing something really cool where I am partnering with a deaf services organization in downtown Seattle called the Hearing, Speech, and Deaf Center. I'm opening up a clinic, and that's where I'll be in full time and starting in September. So you will help very much foster this very cool relationship and clinic going forward. I'm really excited to see what we accomplish in the future together. And I think I'm done, and I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Michael to field Q&As. And I'm willing to stay here until as long as we can keep the webinar going. So
Yeah,
field my time.
there you go. Thank you so much, Dr. Ruffin. What a great presentation. And I have been reading a lot of comments also from the audience members of how much they appreciate all of the great tips and tricks and a lot of what you shared in terms of your personal experiences. They also feel it too. So it's nice to know that a lot of us are not alone in some of the same challenges and opportunities. And also, I think there are quite a few questions people were asking, will this webinar be recorded and shared? And so, yes, it will be posted on the HLAA website. Just give HLAA a few weeks for it to get posted so that they can process a recording and get the PowerPoint also visible in that recording. And you can share that link once it's posted on your LinkedIn with your colleagues, whatever. If you really want to help improve and share, advocacy and awareness around working with hearing loss. So with that, Dr. Ruffin, are you ready for the first question? Yes. So Dr. Ruffin, this first question is, how applicable are your findings and observations to those who wear hearing aids and not necessarily cochlear implants and are profoundly deaf?
Great question. So the indexical cues are applicable to anyone who has any degree of hearing loss. So the greater your hearing loss, the less your ability to hear pitch, which is a key part of indexical cues. Once you get around to like moderately severe hearing loss, it's actually your ability to hear indexical cues is actually getting close to cochlear implants. So yeah, they're reduced.
And I'm seeing a few questions and comments around, the pandemic and having a mask covering, obviously where you might rely on lip reading. And one of the, I think you had a slide talking about the, various traumas that people have. And one called out, the pandemic and COVID could be also a trauma event dealing with not being able to read lips. I thought that was a really good call out. But on that subject of lip reading, Dr. Ruffin, does individuals with hearing loss, do they have any kind of communication advantage from lip reading versus those who do not lip read, especially those that have normal hearing?
I don't know about that. Yeah, I don't know about that specific answer. Like when I say that, I mean, like I've seen it in the research or study or something like that, and I can't comment on that.
Very good.
Oh, wait. Does lip reading affect communication given those? Yeah, I don't know how lip reading plays into it.
Yeah, maybe that's another research topic to investigate. So for those that say, or what is the best advice you can give someone to let the other person know you're talking too fast, you need to slow down so you can hear and process what they're saying? Do you have any advice for that?
I would be very direct. I say I've actually told people this. Doctors giving information over the phone to me is a key part of that. They typically are talking very rapidly and clip their speech. And I tell them, I have hearing loss. There's nothing you need to do other than enunciate and slow down a little bit. So, I mean, I don't know what else to say. So the second point of that, if you can't, you can give positive reinforcement. Like I really appreciate that you were talking slower for me. It helped a lot so that I could process things. And make sure it's not just about hearing, but about processing. I don't know how much I would lean into the processing issue because it might invite like a different perception of you. But I would, as much as you can, lean into positive feedback. If people aren't doing it, I mean, I would get into, I have no problem saying that, look, I've asked you several times to talk slower, and I am a teammate of yours, just like anyone else. And my work is valuable, and I can't do it and we're having to repeat things because you won't slow down. So if you slow down, things are going to be more efficient, and we'll get things done as a team, something like that.
Really good advice. The next question is, do bone conduction headphones improve hearing?
That is a tricky question, because if you have a purely conductive hearing loss, meaning you have an issue getting sound down to your inner ear, it will improve your hearing. If you have a mixed hearing loss where both a conductive hearing loss and the inner ear is not working so well, excuse me, you may not be able to hear as well with the bone conduction headphones. Also, there are bone conduction hearing devices, and the thing that's different between the headphones and the hearing devices is you can change the frequency response of the frequency output to what the patient needs.
Very
So,
good. This next question here, and this might be something that maybe would be best asked in one of your Ask Me Anything Zooms, but this one is, at what point do you recommend people getting a cochlear implant when maybe they're struggling with their hearing aids?
that's probably more of a medical problem question that requires more answers. Sorry. Really, cochlear implants, once you get down to a sentence score of 60%, you're generally a candidate. And the word recognition score of 62% is a bit high. And the reason for that is when you get a cochlear implant, the average word recognition score is around 65%. So you should not take this as medical advice. You really, for this, you need to talk to an implant center and get your hearing tested at an implant center and go from there. Like, that's too complicated of a question, unfortunately.
Yeah, understood. This is a very good question. So for those that work with, international colleagues where, English may not have been their first language. And so for somebody with hearing loss, how can that person self-advocate to better hear in those situations where, they're struggling to hear those thick accents where, English is not their first language?
I'm going to make an assumption that these are people that you may have touch and go relationships with, meaning you don't have time to get to know them. If that's the case, I probably would recommend doing like a Zoom chat or something and have them talk, have them type out their words. Also, Google, I believe Google Meet, the auto captions are much better than other auto captions. That's also a possibility. You can also have what's called cart captioning, where you have a human captioning things. And they caption what you hear. The other option is if it's a phone call, you can use a relay service like InnoCaption, INNOCAPTION, InnoCaption. They have auto caption for phone calls, but then it reverts to a human if the auto captions aren't working. So you can use a relay service and get free transcription services. And that may even work with Zoom meetings, because Zoom meetings often have a telephone number that you can dial into. So the relay operator can dial into the Zoom meeting. I don't know how all of that works exactly, but those are some ideas.
Very good. And this one is kind of an interesting question. Do you know, or are you aware of any test available to a clinician to measure how well someone can comprehend emotion from a spoken phrase?
I've actually studied that myself. So those sentences that you heard are actually cochlear implant testing sentences. And we took they're recorded in a neutral voice, and they have, I think, a total of 4 speakers per list. We added a 5th speaker, and then we had the patients, we had the actors act out a emotion for each sentence, and the emotion for the sentence was randomly assigned. So you could have the pool was filled with dirt and leaves, and that sentence would have like a super happy emotion to it. And then when you record that sentence, you have some other people listening blindly to the recording, and they vote. They voted on the sentence. If all three of them voted happy as a cue, then we kept that as a happy sentence. And if not, we re-recorded it. So, and thank you for the compliment. But that's how, yes, you can do it. You also keep it to more gross emotion, like happy, sad, sarcastic, anxious. You don't get into any like finer, more abstract, less objective emotion. So you keep it as objective as possible. Even with like 4 to 5 emotion tokens, you can segregate out people pretty well.
Thank you. So we're down to the last 5 minutes, so we'll try to get through the remaining questions. And for those of you that are asking questions that we don't get to at all, we'll try to answer some of the questions and post it online as well with the webinar recording. So this next one, you know, Dr. Ruffin, over the last almost decade, there's been a lot of awareness and studies and publications linking hearing loss with cognitive decline. Do you think that because of that increased awareness, people are maybe less likely to disclose they have hearing loss for fear of coming across as, oh, well, I'm now inept and I'm going to have cognitive decline?
No, because this is applicable to the mostly to the elderly population. You don't start getting, hopefully don't start getting cognitive decline until you're out of working age. So, and this also applies to untreated hearing loss, meaning you were in denial, you couldn't afford hearing aids, and you didn't pursue treatment of hearing loss. If you're in a doctor's office and you're monitoring your hearing loss, but you're not getting hearing aids because you're not quite in the category, or maybe you tried over the counter, like that's not the population that is at risk for dementia and the cognitive decline. And I don't think that outside of the hearing loss community is really that well known. So no, I don't think people are avoiding amplification for those reasons.
And we got one question. It's more of a curiosity question. If you're comfortable sharing, what brand cochlear implants do you have?
I have Advanced Bionics, and I'm laughing because Michael is my significant other and he has cochlear, and we live together. So I hear often that cochlear is a better brand, but I have to argue with that. But just kidding. In general, I don't see major differences in brands. Each of them have like different features that they offer. And the hearing is about the same. I made my choice 25 years ago. So, yeah.
Very good. And then this next question is, are there any devices that you'd recommend to help hear better in meetings? This person doesn't think their coworkers are willing to wear microphones.
Sorry, if they're not willing to wear microphones, they're putting themselves legally at risk for lawsuits, and I would have no problem telling people that. I think that diversity is a much bigger, the need for diversity and achieving diversity in workplace settings is much higher on people's radar. And if people were not to wear a microphone, they would be seriously legally at risk. The Rogers system is one system that I like quite a bit. They have several versions. One is a pen. You can put it on people. You can put it on a table. There's also a little circle called the Rogers Select, and that can steer the microphone to the relevant speaker. But I would strongly encourage you talk to human resources or whoever is your supervisor, and tell them. You can tell them of your needs and that they're not being met. You can also get your audiologist to maybe write a letter. But yes, it's not an option is what I'm getting at.
Okay. Yeah, very, very good point. I think we have time for just one more question, and then we'll wrap it up from here. So Dr. Ruffin, for those that are on this webinar that have normal hearing, meaning they don't have hearing loss, don't have hearing aids or whatnot, what advice would you give to them to help advocate or support those that they work with who have hearing loss?
I would ask what the person with hearing loss needs, see if their needs are being met, and ask them if there's any. If they're not, then ask them how you can help. Sometimes that helping may not be hearing related, and I can give you an example. So I work with a group of surgeons that surgeons are often old school, male and white. And I noticed that as a younger person, I wasn't being listened to as much, or maybe because I have hearing loss and I'm a minority. So what I did was I had another person in the meeting who was running the meeting. And what she would do is stop, turn her head towards me and look at me while I was talking. And that was a nonverbal way of signifying to the other people in the meeting that what I had to say was valuable and that people should listen to it. So I have used over the course of my work career, sometimes not talking to the person who's the problem, but getting the people, the buy-in of people who are also in the meeting, and using subtle peer pressures to achieve what I need.
Excellent. Well, I think we are now at the end of the hour. Thank you so much, Dr. Ruffin, for all of the wonderful insights and helping answer a lot of these questions. We had a lot of great questions, so thank you again. And we'll bring it back to you guys to wrap us up.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Ruffin. Thank you, task force members. We really appreciate it. Thank you to Lisa and Lisa, our captioner and our ASL interpreter. And as we've mentioned, the webinar will be up along with the PowerPoint in a few weeks on the HLAA website, hearingloss.org. And thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.